Native American history textbook. The reason I'm taking a look at this is because my friend, movie fan 12 from Manic Expression, recently asked me about the actual history of Pocahontas. He was taking a look at the Disney film and wondered how it compared. Well, as most of you probably know, it's not very well. It's not favorable at all. It's not really a historically accurate film. I mean, there was someone named Pocahontas. There was someone named John Smith. It was Virginia. Powhatan was there. It was the early 17th century, and then after that it really kind of falls apart. So let's talk about the actual history real quick. So who was John Smith? Well, John Smith was a mercenary, professional soldier. He had spent most of his career up to this point, he's now in his late 20s, when he comes to Virginia, fighting against infidels, the Turks of the Ottomans against the Austro-Hungarians. Now, infidels is the word they used. I don't use it derogatorily here. That's just the word that was used. And that's how John Smith had gotten his reputation. He was an adventurer. He was a braggart. He was a big personality. But he was a fairly competent soldier. When he got to Virginia, they had sort of worked out a deal with the local natives to trade to keep the English people alive, because they weren't ready to be self-sufficient in the Americas. They didn't understand the climate. They didn't understand the place. They didn't have good trade routes, so they weren't ready to survive on their own, so they're supposed to trade. But here was the big block. John Smith was a soldier, so guess what tactics he used? Military ones, threatening ones, guns, weapons. He was a problem in the relationship. Powhatan so many times wanted to just wipe out the English and be done with them. The local natives thought these English were so barbaric, and in fact they cut off trade with them at one point, and so the English were eating anything, mice and just other disgusting stuff, rumors of cannibalism. And so natives weren't real excited to have them there. Eventually the English went out, disease, time, tobacco growth, eventually to push them back. But who was Pocahontas in this whole mess? Well, she was the daughter of Powhatan, and she thought the English were okay, and she liked the trade, and so she advocated for it. So she worked as a go-between between the Native Americans and the English to make that trade work. And famously, as John Smith would tell it, she dove on him to save him from being executed by Powhatan at one point. The story's probably not true. John Smith told the story. That's where we get the story from Smith, and he's been proven to be a braggart and a liar on so many occasions. He told the same story with an Ottoman princess doing the same thing in the early wars he fought in. So it seems a little silly. It seems a little ridiculous. It's probably not true. Now, she may have actually saved him from execution at one point, but it wasn't by draping herself over them. That's probably a ridiculous story. And she was the go-between. But what did they do with her for being the go-between? How did the English reward her for helping them out and keeping the trade alive and keeping them from dying off? They kidnapped her. That's right, 17-year-old Indian princess, and they kidnapped her. It was sort of worked out in a way, and she did marry Sir John Rolfe, but then she died of European disease, as many Native Americans did in that era, and that really strained the relationship. If it wasn't for the fact that the English started growing tobacco, the English might have banned the colony altogether, but tobacco became wildly popular and started making the English a lot of money. And so they pushed back the natives. They put in the time, the effort, and the resources they had to eventually win a war. It was a war. It was a war for the existence of those people, and they lost out, unfortunately. That's how history goes all too often. As for John Smith, he actually wasn't in the colonies very long. He really did become injured, but it wasn't because some crazy person shot him. It was because of an accident. Some gunpowder went off on a boat, and he was injured and had to return to England. But he advocated for English settlement in the colonies his entire life. So that's pretty much the real story right there. There's really not that much to it, but of course the movie is silly and fanciful and, well, Disney. So how do we take that? How do we make that? What is that to us? Does that make the movie bad? Does a movie being historically inaccurate inherently make it bad? I guess that's the question we can ask right now. We may have to think about this some more. Okay, so the question's out there. Does historical accuracy contribute to how good or bad a film is? Well, let's look at some examples here on my shelf. Here we go. Apollo 13. A lot of you have probably seen this film. It's a very good film. Incredibly historically accurate. They went to great lengths to get a lot of the details right. Now they probably messed up here and there, as it's almost impossible to get everything precisely right, but they made a great effort and were very historically accurate. But is that what makes this a good film? It's well acted, it's good drama, there's lots of tension, it's interesting to watch. So the historical accuracy helps, but is that what's not really what makes a good film, is it? Or is it? Let's look at some more examples. Here we go. Lincoln. This is a good film. This film has a lot of historical accuracy. It has a number of inaccuracies as well. The dialogue is a big example. A lot of people pointed out that profanity was not right for the time. And that's correct. But does it hurt the overall quality of a quality film? Well, maybe, but maybe not too. This is still a good film. It's still a very watchable film. Heck, I own it. That should tell you something right there, right? I enjoy it. Let's find an example on the other end. Let's look here. Here's one. Inglourious Bastards. Quentin Tarantino's World War II exploitation film. Throws the history book out the window. But it's a good film. It's a fun film. It's well acted. It's got tension, drama, all the things that Lincoln and Apollo 13 had. Well, a little bit different, but it's still a good film, but not historically accurate. It pretty much smashes the history book right in the face towards the end of the film, as most people who've seen the film know. But it's still a good film. So many things to talk about here. So many films. But what about Pocahontas? Is it good or bad because of historical inaccuracies? Well, it's hard to say. Hollywood's always had a troublesome relationship with history. It's never been completely accurate or completely inaccurate. To be honest with you, a good film's a good film because it works. The acting's good, the story's good, people enjoy it. And that's subjective. Just because I like Apollo 13, Lincoln, and Inglourious Bastards doesn't mean everybody who's watching this likes those three films. You might dislike them strongly. You might flat out hate some of those films. And you're free to do that. So, historical accuracy, I guess, is a bonus. A nice thing to have. But it does hurt some films. Pocahontas is one of them. I'm going to be honest. For me, and the subjective, once again, subjective, it's not fact. But the film whitewashes something that was kind of dirty. The relationship between the whites and the Native Americans, which was ugly and brutal and destructive to one side, gets whitewashed in that film in my mind. And so, I just can't like it for that reason. It's always hurt my viewing of the film. And I first saw it when I was really understanding history and getting into the history of things. And I knew it wasn't right, and that's always bothered me. But it doesn't necessarily make it a bad film. There's still a lot of good things to like about the film. Some of the characters are fun, some of the colors are amazing, some of the voice acting is great. So I can't hate the film, but I don't like the film. And anybody who likes it's free to like it. Anybody who dislikes it's also free to dislike it. That's the thing with the film. It's subjective. So, historical accuracy will always be an interesting topic in film. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. It's really up to the people who want to see it. I guess you always have to look into it, and you can always know the real history, and that's where you get your historical perspective.